Hi, this is Tammy Powley. You can find me at www.tammypowley, my weblog, The Crafty Princess Diaries, where I write about my crafting adventures. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about knitting versus crochet because I've had a few newbie people ask me over the past year or so, which one should they learn first? And this is really a difficult question. I think eventually, if you like to work with yarn, you should try to learn both knitting and crochet. However, it really depends a lot on various factors. First of all, I have to admit that I learned crochet first, and I'd been doing it for a number of years before I attempted knitting. And I am still learning how to knit, and I feel very knitting challenged. However, I really want to learn how to do both. I do enjoy crochet more just because it's easier for me. I can actually feel like I can make more things than just a scarf or a dish rag. But just keep that in mind that if you try one and you don't like it, you can try the other, and that with the idea that eventually you can learn to do both. Because another thing that you kind of need to think about is, what do you want to make? With knitting, here's an example of a scarf I'm working on. It is by no means perfect, but with knitting, you tend to have fabric that is a little bit more, malleable, movable. You can tend to make it quite fine more easily than you can with crochet. You can do the same with crochet as well. But with knitting, this tends to work better. Oh, we've got Chanel coming to help us. Knitting tends to work better if you're looking to make things like garments. Like if you really want to make a sweater someday, then you might want to go ahead and start with knitting first. However, with crochet, thank you, Chanel, crochet works best, in my opinion, if you're working to make things like accessories, blankets for sure. It's much faster than knitting a blanket. Crochet can be very fast with when you're trying to make an afghan. Or things like, here's a shawl I'm working on, amigurumi. Knitting tends to work better for garments like sweaters because you can have more of a fine gauge to your material, and then so your garments are not going to be quite as bulky as you might find with crochet. Plus, even though it is definitely possible to make, and I've seen beautiful crocheted sweaters before, there are just many more pattern options available to knitters, and so because there is a limited number of patterns as far as crochet goes when it comes to things like sweaters, again, if that's the type of thing you want to learn to make right away or pretty soon, then yeah, you probably want to start with knitting. Another thing to think about is, do you have anybody to help you in person, an in-person person to help you, not just videos. Videos are great, but boy, every once in a while, if somebody can sit down with you that has a little bit of knowledge, that is something to think about as well. And then there are free resources. There's a few that I can recommend. For knitting, that finally helped me, the website Knit Freedom, KNITFREEDOM.com, is a wonderful site. She has a lot of free videos. In fact, she has a free ebook that really, I feel, taught me how to knit. I had been trying to learn for years, on and off. I even did take a class. It wasn't really a structured class. It was like a free class when I went to a yarn shop. But the woman, she was trying to teach me how to do 2 stitches, knit and purl at the same time. So I would go knit, then purl, then knit, then purl. And I was just lost. Leah's class, her ebook at knitfreedom.com, she starts you with knitting. You buy, they're not this small, but you buy really large knitting needles. I think they're a size 13, and big chunky yarn, and she has you make a big long scarf, and it's just, it was just groundbreaking for me. So definitely go there. If you want to learn how to crochet and get some free crochet lessons, definitely check out YouTube's Crochet Geek. She has some fabulous videos. I use her a lot. In fact, when I'm teaching people how to crochet, sometimes I'll pull up her videos and play them, especially if I'm teaching more than one person. It can be kind of, a little bit too much for me to handle. And I do this for free, by the way, through my school. So I'm definitely not a professional crochet teacher, that's for sure. So the other thing to think about are materials. If you go to Walmart, for example, usually that's where the newbie's going to go first. You can buy a crochet hook like this. This is just a aluminum crochet hook. This is a size G. It's probably a little small for a newbie person, but it's not too bad of a size. This is going to be under $2, and they don't have a lot of, most Walmarts have a very small amount of yarn to pick from, but you can find, a basic baby yarn or worsted Red Heart Super Saver or something like that. I'm not saying that you should start with that. You can also start with really nice yarn if you want, but for probably $5 you can get started learning how to crochet as far as supplies go. For knitting needles, even though you can also buy aluminum, here I have some bamboo ones. You can also buy aluminum ones at Walmart, similarly made material as this hook here. And they tend to be, I'm trying to remember, I think they're probably under $5. So they're going to be more than a crochet hook. And then again, you can buy like a $2 or $3 skein of yarn. So it's cost-wise to get started, a teensy bit more with knitting than with crochet, but just a few dollars difference. So basically, to get started, you're going to need, with knitting, you would need a set of knitting needles. And the difference here with knitting, you have to use both needles. You can see here I've got this yarn is actually attached to the needle. And you cast on the yarn onto the needle to get started. And you use the other needle to work down the whole row. And then what happens is this gets transferred to this. So whatever is on this needle will get transferred to this needle, and you work back and forth in that way. One of the things I've noticed that is problematic with knitting because of this is that if you stop in the middle of a row, you can mess things up. You can forget where you started at. You can get turned around. It's just very difficult. And that's not the case with crochet. Crochet is much easier to stop pretty much anywhere you want. When you do stop, you don't have to worry about anything coming off of the hook because you can just take the hook right off. In fact, I'm trying to find, here's where I took it off. And you just make a big circle here, just pull the yarn into a big circle so you don't have to worry about losing stitches. With knitting, if you set it down and it comes off of the needle and you lose stitches, you get holes, which I'm sure there's some holes in here. And it's really hard to get, it's not impossible. It's just much more difficult to get the yarn back on to the needle once you've started. Whereas with crochet, you don't have to worry that. Anytime you can just pull it out and it's not a big deal. Make a big loop so you don't lose any of your stitches. And so that's one advantage also to crochet. With knitting, as far as stitches go, technically there are really only just two stitches. There's the knit stitch and the purl stitch. And here, this is an example of I'm just doing knitting. I'm doing one stitch over and over and over again. And that's because I'm still pretty new at it and I find it difficult to move back and forth from knit and purl. But those two stitches, for the most part, and variations of them, that makes up knitting. So some people find that simpler because, hey, it's just two stitches, right? Crochet, on the other hand, has quite a few stitches. There's the chain stitch, like here is a chain stitch, and you have to learn this stitch in order to get started pretty much with everything. So there's the chain stitch, there's single crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, triple crochet. There's a lot more. Okay, so but those are the basic ones. Really, those you can make up. And this, for example, this shawl I'm making here, I'm using a lot of double crochet and chain stitch for the most part. So it's really a pretty simple pattern to get started with. And so with that, you really only need to know two stitches in order to make this particular pattern. And that's the case with a lot of crochet projects. They don't, just because there are a lot of stitches, you don't have to necessarily know all of them. An example would be an amigurumi toy. You've probably seen stuffed crochet toys. That, for the most part, you have to learn how to do a few chain stitches, and then almost all of those are made with just single crochet, and that's it. So even though there are a lot of stitches, and this is something that I've heard people who have learned to knit first and then try to crochet, they tend to be, you know, kind of overwhelmed with the number of stitches that there are compared to knitting. And I guess that's kind of it. That's all I'm going to cover here. I'm probably maybe do another video similar to this, but those are really the basics. So what I would say is if you're trying to figure out, should I knit, should I crochet, going back to what I just said, think about what type of stuff do you want to make. Do you want to make shawls and blankets and amigurumi toys? Then pick up a crochet hook, okay? For less than $5, you can get started very easily. Do you want to, are your aspirations someday to make a beautiful hand knit sweater? Heck, go ahead and start with knitting then. It's not impossible. Lots of people start with knitting first and then migrate over to crochet. And then, of course, ask around. Maybe you might even be able to score some free supplies if you know somebody that has been doing it a while and they have maybe changed their preference in the type of hooks or needles. Maybe they've gone up and, like, these are really probably considered low-end knitting needles these days because there's just so many really nice, like, signature needles, and there are some super duper fancy ones out that more experienced knitters would probably be using. And that's it. This is the Crafty Princess, www.tammypowley. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this subject here. Learn to knit or crochet. Which one do you think is best to start with?